I'm a nurse. I work night shifts, and I've seen enough to know when something doesn't belong, even if it looks harmless. Hospitals train you to trust patterns, to read bodies, to react fast, but nothing prepares you for something that follows its own rules and never explains itself. The first time I heard about the cat, I thought it was just another story people pass around to deal with stress because night shifts are long and people need something to talk about that isn't death. They said the cat appears without warning, sits at the end of a patient's bed and waits. No noise, no movement, no reaction, just waiting. And after that, things don't last long. I saw it for the first time during a quiet shift when nothing unusual was happening, and I had no reason to expect anything out of place. The patient in that room was stable, recovering, and there were no signs that anything would go wrong that night. When I entered, the cat was already there, sitting at the end of the bed like it had chosen that exact spot for a reason. It didn't react to me, didn't move at all. I checked the patient carefully, going through everything step by step, and nothing looked off. The monitors were fine, breathing was normal, and if I'd walked in without seeing the cat, I would have left without thinking twice. I stayed longer than I should have, watching both of them, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And when I finally left the room, I told myself it didn't mean anything. 2 hours later, that patient was gone. After that, I started paying more attention. I watched the rooms more closely, and every time I saw that shape at the end of a bed, I stopped. One night, I saw it again in a room with a patient who wasn't critical. I stood outside the door longer than I should have, staring through the glass and trying to convince myself I was overreacting. When I entered, the air in the room felt normal. The machines sounded the same, but the cat was there, sitting in the same position as before, completely still, like it was waiting for something to finish. I walked closer, forcing myself to act like this was just another check. I reached the bed and looked at the patient, and everything seemed fine, but my attention kept going back to the cat because it didn't behave like something that had wandered in by accident. Again, it didn't move and didn't even blink. I moved my hand toward it, not fully sure why I was doing it, but needing to break that stillness, and at that moment, the patient's breathing changed in a way that made me react immediately. I called for help immediately. Staff rushed in, and the room filled with movement and instructions, and I stepped back to give them space, but I kept looking at the end of the bed. The cat was gone, and nobody noticed when it left. The patient didn't survive, and it was impossible to ignore what I'd seen. The nights after that felt different, and I started avoiding rooms when I saw the cat inside, because I didn't know how to stand there and watch it again without reacting. Other nurses knew about it, but nobody said much, and there was an understanding that some things don't get reported because there's nothing to report. You can't write that in a chart, and you can't explain it in a way that makes sense. I kept working, but I changed how I moved through the hospital, and every time I passed a room, I checked. Not for the patient, but for that shape at the end of the bed. Months passed, and I learned to live with that tension, even though it never really left. Then my mother got sick, and everything changed in a way I wasn't ready for. She was admitted to a different hospital, and I visited her after my shifts, trying to keep things normal between us even though we both knew her condition wasn't improving. We talked about small things and avoided anything that made it real. One night, after a long shift, I almost didn't go, but something pushed me to visit anyway, even though I couldn't explain why it felt important. When I reached her door, I didn't go in right away. I looked through the small window first, expecting to see her resting like always. That's when I saw the cat at the end of her bed. I stayed still outside the room, trying to process what I was seeing without jumping to conclusions that felt too heavy to accept. It looked exactly the same, and there was no way it could have been there. I opened the door slowly and stepped inside, and the room felt different, even though nothing had visibly changed. My mother was lying in bed, her breathing light but steady, and everything looked normal except for that one detail. I walked toward the bed, forcing myself to keep moving, and when I got closer, I looked directly at the cat, expecting it to react. It didn't move, didn't turn, didn't do anything that would make it feel like a normal animal. I reached out and grabbed it, acting without thinking, and I expected it to struggle or react in some way that would break the moment. Instead, it turned its head slowly and looked at me, and that look made me stop. I let go without deciding to, and it slipped back onto the bed in the same position. At that exact moment, the monitor behind me changed, and I turned toward my mother and called for help. Staff rushed in, and the room filled with movement, and I stepped back, watching everything while trying to understand what was happening. When I looked again at the bed, the cat was gone. They worked on her for several minutes, and I watched everything closely, knowing what each step meant and what it led to. There's a point when you understand the outcome before anyone says it, and I reached that point while they were still trying. When they stopped, the room became quiet, and one of the nurses looked at me without speaking, and I didn't need her to explain anything. I stayed there after they left, sitting next to the bed and trying to connect what I had seen with what I knew. I didn't see the cat as something that caused it, because that didn't match what I had observed before. It felt more like something that appeared when the outcome was already decided, like a signal that didn't need explanation. I went back to work after some time, and everything looked the same, but I wasn't. I moved through the hospital with a different kind of awareness, and I stopped trying to question things I couldn't change. I still see the cat sometimes, and every time it appears, the pattern repeats without variation, and I don't try to interfere anymore. There are limits to what we can do, even in a place where we're supposed to fix things. People are afraid of death, and that makes sense, but after everything I've seen, I don't think fear's the only way to face it. There are things in life that don't explain themselves and don't need to. If I ever see that cat at the end of my own bed, I don't think I'll try to push it away. Now I understand it isn't there to harm me. He'll just come to tell me that my time has come. The cat of death is a popular belief that has circulated in several hospitals. According to legend, when a black cat perches at the foot of a patient's bed, it foretells their death. It is believed that the cat approaches and curls up next to patients who are near death. I decided to be a surrogate so a couple could have children, but they lied to me the whole time. Wait until you hear what I found inside that house. I went there to see one baby and walked into a place that had more than 20. When I signed the contract, the woman from the agency explained the process and made it sound simple, as if I was just helping a couple who had no other way to have a child. The couple was older than I expected, and from the beginning they acted attentive in a way that made it easy to trust them. Since they showed up to every appointment, asked about my health, and made sure I had everything I needed. The pregnancy went smoothly, and they paid for everything without hesitation, so I focused on getting through it while telling myself that I was doing something useful, even if part of me kept wondering what would happen after the birth. When the baby was born, they took him as agreed, and I stayed in that hospital bed trying to process it while they walked out of the room. And even though I knew this was part of the deal, something about it did not sit right. The days after the birth did not feel normal, and even though I tried to move on, I kept thinking about the baby and wondering if he was okay, since the couple did not contact me at all after taking him. At first I told myself they needed time, but the silence continued. That surprised me because of how they acted before, since they used to check on me constantly during the pregnancy. I went back to the agency and asked if everything was fine, and their response was short and distant, as they repeated that the couple requested privacy and that I should respect the agreement. That answer did not convince me, so I went home, found the address in my documents, and after thinking about it for a long time, I decided to go there just once to see the baby and then leave. The house stood out from everything around it, and even though the lights were on inside, it felt closed off, as if the people there did not want anyone to come close or ask questions. I stood at the gate for a while before pressing the bell, and when no one answered, I noticed movement behind one of the windows, which made it clear that someone was inside, but choosing not to open the door. I pressed the bell again and waited longer, and the silence started to feel intentional, like they were watching me and waiting for me to give up and leave. I moved along the fence and found a section that was not fully secured, and after hesitating, I pushed through and stepped into the yard, telling myself I would just take a quick look and leave. Before getting closer, I slowed down and paid attention to the surroundings. Something about the place felt wrong, and I noticed toys scattered across the ground in a way that did not look like normal play. I reached a window and looked inside, and what I saw made me stop completely, since the room was full of children, far more than I expected, and most of them were very young. They were not playing or interacting, and many looked neglected, with some lying on thin mattresses while others sat on the floor without any supervision, which made no sense in a house like that. I tried to count them again, but there were too many, and the situation became clear in a way that made it impossible to ignore what I was seeing. While I was still trying to understand it, I heard a door open behind me, and the sound was close enough to make it clear that I had been noticed. When I turned around, the man from the couple was standing there, and his expression was completely different from what I remembered. He looked tense and focused in a way that made it clear he was not surprised to see me. "You were told not to come here." He was blocking my path, so I stepped back and told him I just wanted to see the baby.
"I just want to see him."
He did not respond right away, and instead he watched me in silence. "You signed an agreement, and that should have been enough." I pointed toward the window and told him I'd seen the children, and I asked him why there were so many and why they looked like that. And this time his expression shifted to irritation. "You are asking things that do not concern you." I told him I was going to report everything, and at that moment he stepped closer and grabbed my arm with a grip that hurt immediately, and his calm attitude disappeared completely. "You are not leaving right now." He pulled me toward the back of the house, and I tried to resist, but he kept moving, dragging me across the yard while I looked around for anything that could help me break free. Before reaching the door he was aiming for, I noticed it was different from the others, made of metal and secured, and when he opened it, I saw a staircase leading down into a dark space. He pushed me toward the stairs, and I held onto the frame with both hands, using all my strength to stop myself from being forced inside, while he kept pulling and telling me to move. "Get inside and stop resisting," I refused, and asked what was down there, but he did not answer. And instead he pulled harder, making my grip start to slip as I tried to hold on. I looked around quickly and saw a heavy plant pot on a small table next to the door, so I reached for it while still trying to keep my balance. He pulled again, and my hands lost grip for a moment, which gave me just enough space to turn and swing the pot toward his head with everything I had. The impact made him step back and loosen his grip, and even though he stayed on his feet, that moment was enough for me to push him away and move out of his reach. I ran across the yard without stopping, focusing only on getting out of there, and I did not look back as I pushed through the fence and reached the street. I kept running until I found people nearby, since I did not feel safe stopping anywhere close to that house. I went straight to the police and explained everything, including the contract, the house, the children, and what had just happened, and even though it sounded extreme, the details made them take it seriously. They sent a team that same night, and I stayed there waiting, going over every moment in my head while trying to make sense of what I had seen. After some time, officers returned and confirmed that the house had been entered, and what they found matched my description, including the number of children and their condition. They also found the basement, and it was set up with small rooms and equipment that suggested this had been happening for a long time with multiple surrogacy cases. The couple was arrested, and the investigation showed that they had used different women, telling each of them the same story while hiding what they were actually doing. A week later, I went back to the hospital to ask about the baby I carried, and even though I explained everything, they could not give me any information due to the ongoing investigation. I kept thinking about the children inside, especially the younger ones, and the way they were left without proper care, which made it impossible to ignore how serious the situation was. No one has been able to explain why the couple had so many children or what they intended to do with them, and that lack of answers makes everything harder to process. The only thing I know is that I got out before it was too late, and that what I saw inside that house is something I will not forget. Sylvia Zhang and Guojun Xuan are under investigation for having 21 children through surrogacy. The couple was arrested after a hospital reported a traumatic head injury sustained by one of their 2-month-old children. According to authorities, they lied to the mothers, telling them they could not have children. The motives are unknown, but suspicions of child trafficking have been raised.
My shift at the old hospital started like any other. Night shift. The worst. The place was massive, a mix of old and new buildings. But the section I worked in was being demolished to make way for a new neonatology wing. That meant fewer people around, just a handful of security and maintenance workers. Fewer witnesses to whatever the hell was happening inside those halls. I had been working there for months, mostly routine stuff, checking on water lines, removing old piping, making sure no squatters had sneaked in. But everyone knew something was off about that place. It wasn't just the usual creaks and groans of an old building. Things moved. Sounds came from rooms that should have been empty, and sometimes you just felt watched. That night, I had one job. Inspect the remains of the demolished section. Make sure everything was clear before the construction crew came in the morning. I had my flashlight, my radio, and a deep sense of dread. The air inside the abandoned pavilion was thick with dust and something else. A staleness that didn't feel natural. As I moved through the hallways, my footsteps echoed, but the silence around me wasn't complete. There was something faint, distant. I don't know how to explain it. It was like running water. That made no sense. We had cut off the pipes weeks ago. I turned the corner toward the old sinks. A slow drip echoed, then another. The faucets were open, all of them. I tightened them, making sure they were shut, but the sound continued. I could hear water splashing against tile, but the sinks were dry. I should have walked away, caught it in and left, but something pulled me further. Down the hall, past the old patients' rooms, past the collapsed section that led to the morgue. That's when I saw them. I can't express in words the fear I felt in that moment. I saw figures. Figures in front of me just at the edge of my light. Moving, disappearing when I turned to look. I felt the first real wave of fear hit me, but I had seen shadows before. Tricks of the mind, I told myself. But then the crying started. At first it was faint, like a distant echo from another room. A baby crying. But the more I walked, the louder it became. It wasn't normal crying. It was desperate, pained. Coming from the chapel. I stepped inside, the large wooden doors creaking open. The place was dark, empty. Rows of pews stretched before me, and at the far end, near the altar, stood a figure. A nurse. She was facing away, her uniform old, yellowed with time. A long white apron over a blue dress, a cap covering her hair. She stood perfectly still. I took a cautious step forward. She moved. She didn't turn, she just moved a few inches closer. The sound of the baby crying grew unbearable. It was right next to me now, but there was no child in sight. She lifted her foot and tapped it against the wooden floor. Once, twice. My legs twitched, my muscles clenched as if something unseen was forcing me up. The second her foot touched the ground again, I stumbled back, barely catching myself before falling. When I raised my head again, the crying stopped and the nurse was gone. I ran, down the hall past the old offices, but the building didn't feel the same anymore. The walls seemed closer, the air thicker. I reached for my radio. Static. I heard sounds of footsteps behind me. They were slow, deliberate. I didn't want to check my surroundings, but I still did. I don't know why, but it was sure as hell I regretted doing that. I saw a dark liquid seeping from the walls, pooling on the tiles. Blood. While I was running, a door slammed shut down the hall. Then another. One by one, the rooms were closing, forcing me forward, toward the old operating room. The second I stepped inside, the door behind me slammed shut. The overhead light flickered on. Something shifted in the corner of the room. A shape, while the air turned ice cold. There was the figure of the nurse again, twitching violently, its back to me. She was convulsing, jerking its limbs at unnatural angles. Then it stopped. Slowly, it turned to me. I didn't wait. I grabbed the nearest metal tray and threw it. The sound echoed as the thing lunged. She was right in front of me, and she easily grabbed my neck in seconds. Its hands were ice cold, gripping my throat. Fingernails bit into my skin. I thrashed, kicking, clawing. My hand found a scalpel. I drove it into whatever was above me. Her grip loosened. I shoved the thing off me and crawled toward the door, fumbling with the lock. The blood on the walls began dripping faster, soaking my clothes. The door finally gave way. I ran. I didn't stop. Past the collapsing hallway, past the chapel, through the halls that felt wrong. The air was thick with the stench of blood. My boots slipped on the soaked floor. My breath was ragged, shallow. The entrance was just ahead. The old iron doors. I pushed forward, ignoring the cold hand that seemed to reach from the walls. The whispers growing louder. My hands hit the door. It was locked. No, no, no! This can't be! I pounded against it, throwing my weight. Something was coming. The footsteps behind me, faster, closer. I turned. It was someone with a flashlight. It was really blinding. I suddenly heard a woman's voice. Hey, are you okay? It was a nurse. I didn't know what she was doing there, but she seemed normal. I watched around her. The hospital was just like before. No blood, no ghost, nothing. Suddenly, the door in front of me was opened. I didn't try to talk to the nurse. I was too in shock. I just ran out of the building. The nurse probably thought I was a thief or that I'd gone crazy. I never went back. I quit the next day. They asked why, but I didn't have an answer they'd believe. A week later, the building was demolished. I sometimes think about what I lived that night. And then, a thought comes to my mind. What was a nurse with a flashlight doing in the abandoned part of the hospital? If the door was locked, how did she enter? If she heard someone and went to investigate, why would she be alone? You know, I'm probably mistaken, but if I didn't run that night, would I be here telling this story? This story is based on real events that took place at the Madariaga Hospital in Posadas, Argentina, an old medical center with a disturbing past. Several workers and witnesses reported paranormal occurrences in the old pavilions before they were demolished, including the cries of babies coming from the chapel, shadows that vanished when approached, and faucets turning on by themselves, even though the water supply had been cut off. One of the most terrifying apparitions is that of a nurse dressed in an old-fashioned uniform, who was said to touch people with her foot to make them stand up. The story gained even more attention when a photo taken before the demolition showed a ghostly figure among the rubble. Hospital workers insist the building had an unsettling energy, with doors slamming shut on their own, unexplained noises in empty rooms, and blood-like stains appearing on the walls and floors. Although the hospital has been modernized and much of the original structure no longer exists, accounts of terrifying experiences persist, fueling the legend that something still lingers in the place. Disclaimer: this animated story is inspired by a real-life mystery and has been reimagined as a work of fiction. My name is Alan Whitaker, and I worked as a janitor in the Blackwood Medical and Experimental Center for a year and a half. A period in my life that, while short-lived, left a dark and lasting imprint on my mental health and life as a whole. See, in 2021, I got the job through a friend's reference when I was 37. While the place was well known in our town of Hollow Creek, the Blackwood facility was notoriously known as a place most people didn't want to be in. And it was only after I started as the janitor that it became clear why. Soon enough, I found myself dreading the hours between 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. when I had to go in every day to work because, honestly, walking into those halls every night felt like the start of a horror movie. The hallways were so narrow, they gave off a never-ending vibe, and the dim light bulbs above flickered vigorously. All you could hear was the sound of huge fan blades turning slowly, and the screams of tortured and suffering people that the facility called patients. Everyone knew they weren't patients, though. If anyone claimed they didn't know, one visit to this place would convince them otherwise. Yet people would walk in every day and admit family members, friends, and probably enemies, all hoping the facility would perform bizarre experiments and treatments, mess them up and write it off as some medical issue. The screams were what I heard every night as I rolled my cart through the halls. The worst part? Many reports had been filed over the years, but the facility had deep roots in the government, so investigations either ended before they started or dragged on as never-ending cases in court. Now, admittedly, the thought of quitting crossed my mind several times, but things at home were so bad at the time that I simply couldn't, and as a result, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and before I knew it, I was pushing my cart through those narrow, dark halls, trying hard to focus on nothing but cleaning and minding my own business. One night, on May 29th, 2023, I went in for work around 7:30 p.m. I couldn't tell exactly what it was, but from the moment I reached the tall iron gates of the facility, something felt very wrong. The building's already dark vibe seemed even worse that night, and goosebumps had appeared all over my body before I'd taken a step inside. As usual, I shook the feeling off and got to work. At first, everything seemed as normal as it could be, but the atmosphere that night felt extra thick, and unexpected chills ran down my spine throughout my shift. I hurriedly did my job, and at around 10 p.m., I began wheeling the cart to the east wing to finish up cleaning. Aside from the heavy hum of the fan blades, there was an unusual silence in the facility. The only other sound was the loud creak of my cart's tires as I walked down the seemingly endless hall. It took me a while to notice the silence as I'd gotten good at drowning out the usual noise. But after I eventually picked up on how strange it was, I rubbed it off and kept moving. As I walked, I found myself staring at the floor, and although the dim lights barely let me see, I noticed the tiles were darker and dirtier than usual, with strange mold growing along the edges. It didn't seem out of the ordinary at first, but I couldn't take my focus off the mold. As just like everything else that night, something felt very wrong about it. That's when I noticed it. A twitch, barely noticeable, followed by another. Then I realized what was wrong with the mold. I couldn't explain it at the time, and I honestly thought I was losing my mind, but it almost looked like the mold was moving away from something, slow but desperately dragging itself across the floor. Shocked, I muttered under my breath, "What the hell?" and bent over slowly to get a closer look. Suddenly, the silence was shattered with a loud crash of glass breaking, accompanied by shards flying everywhere. Terrified, I dropped to the floor, covering my head with my hands. After the crash, all I heard was a thud followed by silence. I got up slowly and was met with the horrific sight of a black bird lying in my cart, its neck broken and its eyes bulging. In that moment, it was glaringly obvious that something was terribly wrong, and I felt an overwhelming urge to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. As I turned to leave, I heard screams and sudden footsteps coming from behind me. The first doctor burst out from the East Wing, dressed in his full surgical attire, stained with blood. Behind him, I saw 3 more doctors in white coats, all running from something. I couldn't tell what it was, but with every fiber of my being already screaming to flee, the terrified look on the face of the doctor in blue was the last push I needed. I took off after him, scrambling for an exit and praying to whatever God might listen that I'd make it in time. The further I ran, the more terrified I became. My heartbeat was the only thing I could feel. Goosebumps covered my body, and the air was so thick it felt like the only way to breathe was to escape. Behind me, however, I could hear the others running, and the light bulbs began to burst systematically behind them. I glanced back when I heard the first scream, and what I saw was so horrific that my heart sank to my stomach. A shadowy arm emerged from the darkness, moving impossibly fast. It didn't seem real or physical, but for a brief second, I glimpsed what it looked like a rotten face with long, matted hair. Before I could process, the arm wrapped around the leg of the last doctor in white. And as he tried to keep running, his knee popped out of place, and he let out a blood-curdling scream before being dragged into the darkness. One by one, the footsteps behind me went silent. Then out of nowhere, I felt cold fingers wrap around my ankle, pulling me to the ground, and no matter how hard I struggled and clawed at the floor, I too was slowly dragged into the darkness. I expected to be dead once I was pulled into the dark, but when I wasn't, I opened my eyes slowly, barely able to make out anything around me. The entire building was now plunged into darkness, but I'd been in those halls long enough to navigate them. I leaned against the walls, feeling my way from wing to wing without issue. Finally, as I turned into the stairwell leading to the back exit, I noticed a black wheelchair blocking the path. As I approached, it turned around slowly, revealing the long-haired figure from earlier. This time, I had a clearer view of the man. His body was covered in surgical scars and incisions, his flesh pale and decayed. It was then that I fully understood what was happening. The horrors of this place and its doctors had finally caught up to them. Don't get me wrong, the figure in front of me was utterly terrifying, radiating a dark energy. But I could tell that if I was meant to be dead, I would have been. Soon enough, he was gone. I left the facility and never spoke of that night to anyone until now. The town was shocked to find the dismembered corpses of the doctors in the days that followed, and the facility was temporarily closed before shutting down permanently in early 2025, in yet another attempt to bury its secrets. That night scarred me, and the nightmares and anxiety won't fade easily, or anytime soon. Visions of the man's disfigured body and the doctor's screams still haunt me, but in a way, I believe it was for the greater good. What I know for certain, though, is that whatever dark secrets are kept, there are even darker things lingering, watching, and one day, they might just come out of hiding. This story is loosely inspired by mysterious CCTV footage that caused a stir on the web in late 2024, depicting supernatural behavior in a medical facility somewhere in Ohio. The footage left many viewers shaken and many others with questions. But to this very day, all questions remain unanswered. I work night shifts in the basement of St. Marcus Hospital. It's just me, metal drawers, and dead people. No sunlight, no noise, just fluorescent lights that buzz too loud and the slow hum of the refrigeration unit. I don't mind being alone. The bodies never bothered me. They stay where they're put, and they don't talk back. That night started like any other. 3 arrivals, 1 transfer, all tagged, all documented. Everything was logged at 1:42 a.m. I signed in a burn victim from a car crash, no ID. They'd labeled him John Doe. No relatives claimed him. The sheet said he came in with a partial skull fracture, burns on 60% of the body, and some missing teeth. His eyes were listed as intact. That part stayed with me. I didn't think much about it at the time. I wheeled him in and placed him in drawer 17B, locked it. I wrote up the file, scanned the barcode, and went for coffee. The hallway was dead quiet, like always. The kind of silence you don't really hear until you notice it's too perfect. About an hour after, I went back in to clean up at the station. That's when I noticed something was off. The door to 17B was sticking out an inch. That should have been impossible. These drawers lock when fully closed. I pulled it open and saw the body inside, but something was wrong. He was twisted around, like someone shoved him in backward. Head facing the wrong way, arms crossed awkwardly. I straightened the body and checked for the toe tag. It was gone. I checked again. Nothing. No name, no hospital stamp. The barcode sticker I placed on the drawer earlier was missing too. That doesn't happen. Ever. I went to the logbook. His file was gone. Not deleted, gone. The folder was just empty. No record, no ID, no autopsy scheduled. It was like he never existed. I stood there, still holding the clipboard, and heard the ventilation unit click on. The fan spun up, then died, then started again, slow and stuttering, like it was jammed. I walked over and looked at the grate. The hum got louder, but the air coming out wasn't cold. It was warm, and it smelled of not rot, not chemicals, something else, something sharp and coppery. Then the hum stopped completely, and for 5 full seconds, I swear I heard breathing. Slow, thick, wet breathing, right on the other side of the vent. I stared at that vent too long. When I blinked, I thought I saw movement behind the grate. Just for a second. A flicker, something pulling back. I stepped forward, leaned in with my flashlight. The light caught 2 round shapes. They blinked, fast, not animal eyes, not human. Something was alive in there. Then it was gone. I stumbled backward, knocking over the metal stool behind me. My flashlight hit the floor. I scrambled to grab it, but the room was already different. Colder, but not from the AC. It felt wrong. Not the kind of wrong you explain. The kind that makes your skin pull tight, like your body knows something your brain doesn't. I turned toward the body. Drawer 17B was open again. All the way out. Empty. The sheet was still there. The shape of the body still pressed into it. But he was gone. There was no sound, no dragging, no movement. He just wasn't there anymore. And I was alone in that room, holding a flashlight with nothing but empty metal drawers and cold air around me. I backed out slowly. Every drawer locked shut, but my eyes kept going back to the ceiling tiles. One of them had shifted just slightly, like something pushed up against it from the other side. That's when one of the towels dropped, hit the floor, and shattered. I ran. I sprinted out of the morgue into the hallway and turned toward the security station. The overhead lights started going out behind me, one by one. With each step I took, another light died. I didn't stop. I knew if I turned around, I'd see him, or it. And I couldn't risk seeing what wasn't supposed to be walking. I made it to the security room, slammed the door, locked it, and pulled up the monitors. Camera 4 covering the morgue was out, just static. The other cameras were fine, until they weren't. One by one, they cut to black, except for the feed from the hallway just outside the morgue. That one stayed on, and I saw something crawl past it. Not walk, crawl, like a man dragging himself with his elbows only. I heard a thud above me. The vent again. I dragged the metal shelf over and climbed it. Screwed the vent shut with my pocket tool. That's when I realized how useless everything was. No cell service in the basement, no backup, no exit. The elevator was locked for the night. I was boxed in with that thing. The only other unlocked room nearby was the med supply closet. I ran inside, locked the door behind me. Fluorescent light flickered overhead. The room stank of iodine and plastic. I moved between shelves, trying to find a weapon. That's when I heard the sound. Not a footstep, a tap, repeated like someone drumming fingers against metal, slowly, just to be heard. When I turned, he was there, standing still between the shelves, bare skin, no clothes. His body was covered in fresh burn marks, but not blackened. Pink, raw, like the skin had been peeled back and never healed. His mouth hung open, no tongue, just teeth, some broken, some cracked. His eyes were moving, fast, darting side to side like a trapped animal. One arm was dragged behind him. He didn't make a sound, just stepped forward. I picked up a fire extinguisher and threw it. It hit his shoulder. He didn't react. He lunged, fast. Not human fast, animal fast. He slammed into me and knocked me to the floor. His skin was hot, not warm, hot. I grabbed a metal pole and smashed it into his face. He didn't bleed, just kept coming, mouth open, eyes wide. I scrambled up, ran back into the hallway. My legs were weak, my chest burned. I could feel his weight behind me. He never stopped moving. I hit the morgue door, got it open, and dove inside. Locked it, slammed the cold drawer cart in front. I turned to face the room. The lights flickered once, then off. A second later, the metal drawers all began to rattle. Soft at first, then louder, one after another shaking violently. Drawer 17B slid open. He was inside, climbing out slowly. Head first, eyes locked on me. No rush. That didn't make any sense. The corpse was behind me, chasing me. How could it possibly be there? And at that moment, a disturbing thought crossed my mind. What if the corpse never chased me? What if whatever this dead person was wanted me to come here, to lock myself in with them? Was this the first time I was face to face with the corpse? I felt like a trapped mouse, deceived and manipulated by something I couldn't understand. But I knew one thing. One way or another, I wasn't going to let him hurt me without defending myself. I grabbed the bone saw. No time to think, just swung, hit his arm. It cracked, bent the wrong way. He grabbed me with the other, pulled me down. I dropped the saw and stabbed him in the side with a scalpel. It went in deep. He didn't stop. His mouth closed around my shoulder. I screamed and slammed his head against the metal table. Once, twice, 3 times. He let go. I shoved him back into the drawer, slammed it shut, locked it. Then locked it again with chains. My hand was bleeding. I didn't care. I sat on the floor breathing hard, watching the drawer. He didn't move again. I stayed there for 3 more hours until sunrise. No one came. No one called. The hospital above was still running like nothing happened. But below, something had changed. I never went back. Quit the next day. Left the badge on the desk. Didn't answer their calls. 2 weeks later, I saw the news. Basement of St. Marcus under investigation. No reason given. I tried to forget. I failed. Every night I see the drawer. Drawer 17B. I see his eyes, open, unblinking. You think it ends when you close the body bag. It doesn't. Not always. Sometimes they open again. And when they do, they don't want out. They want you in. The operation ended at 3:12 a.m. I remember the clock because I stared at it for a full minute before I could even take my gloves off. Thomas Griggs came in with a stab wound to the abdomen, deep enough to cut through bowel and nick the liver. It took me almost 9 hours to close him up. I was soaked in sweat, my fingers cramped, legs trembling. Not from fear, from exhaustion. He was unconscious the whole time, eyes fluttering a few times but never opening. I thought he was just another patient I dragged back from the edge. He wasn't. When I sat down in the staff lounge, someone had printed his intake form. That's when I saw the police note. Suspected in domestic homicide. Wife found dead in residence. No charges. Ongoing investigation. I dropped the paper and stared at the floor. It didn't change anything. At least, that's what I told myself. But there was something in the way he looked in the OR. Not desperate, not scared. He looked like someone waiting for a storm that never came. I left the hospital an hour later, barely able to keep my eyes open. I don't remember the drive home. I think I slept 3 hours that morning, maybe 4. But I didn't feel rested. My arms were heavy when I got up. Not sore, just drained, like I had something clinging to me I couldn't shake off. The exhaustion didn't lift over the next few days. I drank coffee, ate protein bars, took vitamins. Nothing helped. Every step through the hospital halls felt heavier. My body responded slower. My head would throb in rooms without sound. I chalked it up to burnout. Normal, considering the schedule. But there was something else behind it. A pressure that built gradually, like a sound just below hearing. Something I couldn't name. Small things started to stand out. I'd hear someone behind me in the stairwell, but when I turned, no one was there. One night, I left the OR late and saw a faint shape through the glass of the surgical supply room. It wasn't clear. It was just standing motionless, between racks of gauze and gloves. I stared at it for too long. When I opened the door, the motion sensor lights flicked on and the room was empty. I walked out and told myself not to come back there alone again. I started avoiding room 303. That's where we put Griggs post-op. Even just walking by made my chest tighten. I didn't want to see him. I couldn't explain it. I felt like he watched me more than anyone else. Not just with his eyes, with something else. Something I couldn't point to. The nurses said he barely moved, barely spoke. But they said that when he did speak, he only asked about his son. At night, I'd dream I was still in surgery. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, thinking I forgot to suture something. Once I woke up and saw the light in my hallway was on. I live alone. I kept it off. The door was still locked. Nothing missing. But I started locking my bedroom door after that. I thought I was losing my mind. Then the kid showed up. I was reviewing charts when one of the nurses told me that Griggs' son was visiting with relatives. I didn't think much of it. I wasn't scheduled to see them. I kept working. But on my way to radiology, I saw the boy. He was standing at the far end of the hallway, completely still. He was facing me, not blinking. I slowed my steps. He didn't flinch. There was no noise around us, no machines, no charts, no monitors beeping. Just him staring down the hallway like he was watching something behind me. I called out to him. He didn't answer. I took another step. "Hey, buddy, are you lost?" That's when his face changed. His mouth opened slightly, like he wanted to scream but couldn't. Then he turned and ran, bolting around the corner like something was chasing him. His aunt came running after him seconds later, apologizing. She said he'd been acting strange ever since he'd heard his dad was alive. He'd had nightmares. Sometimes refused to sleep. Sometimes pointed at the ceiling and said she was there. She didn't explain who she was. That night, I stayed late again. I felt wired but sluggish, like my body didn't want to move, but my brain wouldn't stop. I stayed late in my office organizing reports, trying to keep my mind off everything. I told myself I'd leave by 9. I packed my things, I turned off the lights. That's when the door slammed shut behind me. There was no sound, no draft. The door closed with force that shook the glass. Everything felt silent. Not hospital quiet, not nightmare quiet. This was the kind of silence that fills your head like pressure underwater. Something yanked my hair backward, hard. My body twisted before I even hit the floor. My back slammed into the linoleum. I couldn't see who or what did it. I screamed, but it came out as a grunt. I was dragged by the scalp, heels kicking, papers flying off my desk. Then it stopped. I was flung toward the door. My head hit the lower part of it, just above the handle. I scrambled to get up, face bleeding, vision swimming. I crawled to the windowsill on the door, tried to see who was outside. I leaned in too close. My head slammed into the glass. I didn't do it. I didn't move. Something forced my face into the small square window and held it there. The wood dug into my cheek. Then it started pushing harder. Not fast. Slow, deliberate. I felt my skin slide against it, the pain growing with each inch. I couldn't pull back. My arms flailed, but my body wouldn't respond right. My mouth opened to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the pressure. Suddenly, it let go. I collapsed, rolled over gasping. Blood ran down my face. I tried to stand, but a force hit me from the side, knocking me into the cabinet. Then again from the back. I staggered out of the office, each step thrown sideways by something invisible. I ran into walls, clipped corners, bruised everything. I crawled the last stretch down the hall. I don't remember passing the nurses. I heard them yelling, but I couldn't respond. I just wanted out. I needed distance. I needed air. I didn't go back the next day. I barely slept. I had bruises on my ribs, cuts on my cheek. I didn't care. I wanted to pretend the hospital didn't exist. Around noon, my phone rang. It was my supervisor. I almost didn't answer. When I did, he didn't ask how I was. He mentioned my injuries. He just said one thing. "You need to come in. It's urgent. It's Griggs." I wanted to hang up. I wanted to throw the phone out the window, but I said I'd come. I didn't know why. I walked into the hospital, shaking. The nurses didn't look me in the eyes. One of them just pointed toward room 303. I walked in with 2 other staff. The moment I stepped inside, I knew something had happened. The air smelled different. Not rotten, not chemical, just steel, thick. Thomas Griggs was dead. His mouth hung open, eyes bloodshot. A pillow was on the floor. His face was purple, strangled, not by hands, not by cords, just pressed until there was nothing left. I looked around. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was moved. The machines had stopped beeping 30 minutes before. No alarms were triggered. The nurse on shift said she stepped out for 10 minutes, came back, and found him like that. There were no signs of struggle, no skin under his nails. The camera footage showed his vitals flailing. Nobody walked in. Nobody walked out. But he died. Not gently, not painlessly. He was smothered, and there was no one there. The autopsy confirmed asphyxiation by compression. No fingerprints, no trace evidence. They ruled it an accident or suicide. Nobody believed that, but nobody said otherwise. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. No dreams, no whispers, no bruises in the morning. Whatever was following me stopped. 3 days passed. I avoided the ICU. I kept my shifts light. I didn't want to see room 303. I didn't want to be near it. I didn't tell anyone what happened in my office. I wasn't ready to be called insane. Then the kid came back. I saw his aunt and uncle first. They were pale, tense. The man had his phone out. He walked straight toward me and said we needed to talk. I almost walked away. Then he showed me the screen. It was a video recorded during their first visit. The hallway, me walking out of my office. The kid's camera had been aimed at me from a distance. But that wasn't the focus. Next to me, half a step behind, was a tall black shape. No features, no movement. It was just there, standing with me, like it belonged. I couldn't speak. I stared at the figure, feeling the blood drain from my face. Then the kid, quiet all the time, said it. The only words he spoke. "It's her. That's Mommy." There was no room for doubt. The shape hadn't glitched. It hadn't faded. It had stood, watching, waiting, and the kid, he recognized her. His mother, dead, murdered, and now standing next to me. The air around me felt like ice. I gave the phone back without a word. I walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I couldn't. That night I sat on the floor of my apartment, lights on, back against the wall. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I kept thinking of the pressure against my face, the dragging, the bruises, and that boy. That boy who looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. He thought he'd escaped. I saved a killer, and I think something made sure he didn't stay saved for long. I left trauma shortly after that, switched to outpatient care. Paperwork and follow-up. No surgeries, no late nights. I didn't say why. Nobody asked. I think they all felt something was off. They just didn't want to know more. Sometimes late at night I think about the figure, about her, about what she did. The attacks, the pain, the fear. She hated me, and I couldn't blame her. I saved the one who killed her. She couldn't speak, but she didn't have to. I haven't seen the kid since that last visit. I think about him more than I'd like. I wonder if he sleeps now, if she still visits him, or if she finally left for good after finishing what she came for. I don't talk about what happened, not to friends, not to therapists. There are no words that make it sound real. But I did buy a camera. I keep it in my apartment, always on, because sometimes when I'm alone, I feel the floor creak behind me, and I need to know if she ever comes back.
My name's Rachel. I work night shifts at St. Matthew's Hospital. It's not a big place, and the third floor is usually empty except for a few long-term patients. That night I was covering it alone. The other nurse called in sick, and they couldn't find a replacement. I was tired, but I stayed. I didn't have a choice. Room 319 was still occupied. Her name was Linda. Late 60s, no family nearby. I'd spent most of my breaks with her over the past few weeks. She barely spoke, but when she did, she always asked for me. She used to be a nurse, too. We had this quiet bond. That night, she wasn't doing too well. Her breathing was irregular, her heart rate unstable. She needed observation, and I didn't want to leave her alone. By 2 a.m., the halls were dead quiet. All the lights were on, monitors were steady. I sat at the nurse's station watching the vitals through the central screen. That's when I heard something move down the hall. A slow, dragging sound. Plastic over linoleum. I thought maybe someone was up. Maybe a patient had wandered. I stood up and walked down the hallway toward the sound. All the doors were shut, except for one. Room 319. It was open. I stepped in. Linda was asleep, or at least her eyes were closed. But the room felt off. The air wasn't cold, but heavy in a way that I hadn't felt before. I looked at her monitor. It was on, but the data was frozen, heart rate flat, numbers stuck. I tapped the screen and it blinked back to normal. Then a loud click behind me made me jump. The door had shut, hard. I turned and opened it again, but it creaked like it had been oiled in years. I was starting to feel dizzy. I pulled out my phone to check the time. It was 2:43 a.m. The moment I unlocked it, the screen glitched, static, green lines, then black. The flashlight turned on by itself, then shut off. The screen went dead. I shoved it back into my pocket and stepped into the hallway. That's when I noticed it. The chair from the waiting area, the one always against the wall, was now in the middle of the hallway. And it wasn't just moved. It was facing room 319. No footsteps, no noise. Nothing. I went back to the nurse's station and tried calling security. The line didn't connect. No dial tone, just silence. I stood there a moment. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't ready for what came next. The hallway lights flickered, not random. One by one, down the line, starting from the far end and moving toward me. I turned and looked at the camera monitor, but the feeds were all black, like they'd been unplugged. No signal, no backup. I stood still, listening. Then I heard the wheels. Not fast, just rolling. Something metal, unsteady. I peeked around the corner. A gurney was rolling on its own. Slow, uneven. One broken wheel. And it was squeaking. It stopped just outside room 319. Then silence. It didn't make sense. There was no incline, no push. I backed up toward the station when I saw someone standing at the end of the hallway. A man, pale skin, hospital gown. Too tall. He wasn't facing me, just standing still, his head tilted like he was listening to something inside the wall. I whispered, "Hey." He didn't react. I blinked, and when I looked again, he was gone. I heard Linda scream. I ran. I burst into room 319. She was sitting up, eyes wide open, mouth open, with no sound coming out. Her hands gripped the sheets like she was holding on to something invisible. I rushed to her side and checked the monitor. Blank screen again. I tried to calm her, but her eyes weren't looking at me. They were locked on the corner of the room. That's when I saw it. Something crawling across the ceiling. Fast, then still. Like a spider, but wrong. Too human. Limbs bent the wrong way. It didn't drop or jump, it just let go like it was made of rope. It hit the floor hard, but didn't fall. It stood up. I grabbed Linda by the arm and tried to pull her up, but she wouldn't move. Her whole body was stiff like stone. The thing took a step forward. Its face wasn't a face. No features, just flesh stretched tight over where eyes and a mouth should have been. I backed up, dragging the wheelchair toward the door. It didn't chase us. It turned its head toward the door and vanished. One blink. Gone. But the door slammed shut again. Locked. I pulled and kicked at it, while Linda kept whispering the same words over and over again. "He came back. He came back. He came back." I tried to ask what she meant, but her voice cracked and she froze again. The lights flickered. The emergency alarm sounded 3 times, then cut out. The intercom switched on, full of static. A voice, soft, broken, said something. Just one word. "Stay." I pushed Linda down the hallway as fast as the old wheelchair would let me. Her breathing had slowed again, but she was still awake. Her eyes locked on something behind me. I didn't want to look. I just wanted to reach the elevator. I kept my head forward and focused on the green glow of the exit sign. Then I heard it. Bare feet slapping the floor, wet and heavy, like something crawling at first, and then rising into a run. I looked back once. He was there. Same man from earlier. Hospital gown dragging, arms stiff and wrong. His face had no eyes, no mouth, just skin, like it had been pulled over something else. But he moved like a man. Fast. I turned a corner too hard. The wheelchair clipped the wall and tipped halfway over. Linda cried out, but I didn't stop. I yanked it back upright and kept moving. The man was getting closer. His steps echoed fast, like he was gaining momentum with every second. I pushed harder, my arms burning, my legs starting to lock up. We reached the end of the hallway. The elevator was still 3 doors away. The light above it was dead. I didn't know if it worked. I looked at Linda. She was trying to speak, her mouth barely moving. I froze for a second, and then I ran. I let go of the wheelchair and sprinted down the hall. I didn't look back. I didn't say anything. I heard metal scraping. Maybe the chair falling again. Maybe Linda's body hitting the ground. I don't know. I didn't stop. I reached the elevator. I slammed the button, but nothing lit up. I hit it again and again. No response. The lights above the door flickered once, then stayed off. I turned around, breathing hard, throat burning. He was halfway down the hallway now. He didn't walk like before. He charged. His feet slapped harder, his arms swinging unnaturally. His neck snapped to the side like he didn't know how to balance. His face was still blank, but I could feel his focus locked on me. I ran again, down the stairs this time. I skipped steps, slammed into the wall at the landing, then down to the next floor. My shoes slipped on the tile. My shoulder hit the railing, but I didn't stop. I didn't scream. I just wanted out. I burst into the first floor. The reception desk was empty. I ran across the lobby, shoved the front door open, and hit the parking lot. The night air was sharp and cold. There were cars, but no people. I kept running until I hit the sidewalk. Then I collapsed on the grass, hands shaking so hard I couldn't hold my phone. I never went back to St. Matthew's. I filed my resignation 2 days later. I never told them what happened. I didn't even ask about Linda. I couldn't. If she died, it was my fault. And if she didn't, I still left her. Either way, I didn't want the answer. I still don't understand why I left her alone that night. Part of me wants to think it was something about that entity, whatever it was, that influenced me. But another part of me thinks otherwise. I was afraid. I was more afraid than I'd ever been in my life. So afraid that I was willing to let a defenseless woman die so that I could survive.